Welcome to Globetrotting with Lynx. I am your host, and I guess I should get the name out of the way right from the start. I'm a science fiction fan, and I was honored with a fictional peerage by a group that I used to run, and that peerage was Lynx. Now I tend to use it in fandom circles, but also as a nickname as I really like it, and it tends to go well with my new image from a few years ago. For this fourth episode, I picked something fun. This summer, I was in Rome, which is an amazing city to visit. It's a vibrant city and one that I highly recommend you go to see if you get the chance. I was fortunate enough this summer to travel with WinWin Sorela, the penultimate Queen Universe Philippines, with whom I did a photo shoot while we were in London. And we were also joined by a friend of mine, Emilio, who is an Italian and is actually registered as a tour guide for the city of Rome, even though he doesn't do that for a full-time job. We greatly enjoyed exploring the sights of Rome. So the area Rome occupies has been inhabited for approximately the last 14,000 years, with evidence of stone tools and weapons from about 12,000 years ago. Settlements have been found on the area now known as the Palatine Hills from around that time. This has led to the refutation of the myth that Rome was founded by Romulus and Remus, two boys suckled by a she-wolf. Even the name Rome, which the myth says came from Romulus, may have, in quite the reversal, have led to the name Romulus. The mid-8th century BCE is generally viewed as the time when the city of Rome was officially founded, and it does track with the legend, which puts it at April of 1753 BCE. Initially, Rome was a monarchy, and Romulus was the name of its first king. This lasted for 244 years until 509 BCE, at which point Rome became a republic. Specifically, an oligarchical republic led by two consuls who were elected annually from the patrician class. By the 3rd and 4th centuries BCE, Rome had become a powerhouse in the Mediterranean, replacing Greece as the dominant force. Through the Punic Wars with Carthage and the Macedonian Wars with Macedonia, Rome took its place on the world stage. In the 2nd century BCE, the Roman Senate had come into its own, and while the consuls still had immense power, it was slightly curtailed by the Senate to a certain degree. Within the Senate, two main groups vied for power and control. These were the optimates, who were the wealthy upper class, and the populares, who derived their power from the plebs. This time period also saw many internal revolts and wars, while also seeing some attempts at social reform. Tiberius, along with Gaius Gracchus, tried the social reform, which unfortunately failed. Spartacus led a slave revolt at this time, made famous in the movies. And at the end of these turbulent times, the first triumvirate was established with Gaius Julius Caesar, Pompey Magnus, and Marcus Licinius Crassus as the three people in charge. Caesar went on to conquer Gaul in what is today France, and this gained him great popularity. Upon his return to Rome, he was denied entry with his legions, as they were not allowed to cross the Rubicon River. It was here, according to Plutarch at least, that Julius Caesar uttered the famous phrase, "Yalel jacta est," although he supposedly said it in Greek, not Latin. The phrase means the die is cast, and literally means, essentially to borrow from a later author of the Victorian era, the game is afoot. According to Plutarch in his work, The Life of Pompey, he, referring to Caesar, declared in Greek with a loud voice to those who were present, "Let a die be cast, and led his army across." Caesar also gave us the seminal work on the Gallic Wars, where he described his campaigns against the Gauls and their chief Vercingetorix. After the Civil War in Rome, he also wrote the Commentari di Bello Civili on the war up until the death of Pompey. Or Pompey, if you will, so as not to confuse it with the city. After returning to Rome, Caesar began his war with Pompey. Crassus was an early casualty in that he became a non-entity and his contributions to the conflict were minimal. With his two foes vanquished, Caesar began establishing himself as a dictator. This, however, would not stand with the Senate, and in 44 BCE, he was stabbed in the Senate on the 15th of March. This is where we get the term the Ides of March. Beware the Ides of March. This led to his general Mark Antony trying to usurp power, and his adopted son, Gaius Octavian, later Augustus, taking up arms against each other. This is where Egypt enters back into the Roman story. There was a little bit of a dalliance between Cleopatra and Caesar, which supposedly resulted in Cleopatra's son, Caesarion. But anyways, so Caesar had previously mediated between Ptolemy XIII and his sister Cleopatra as to who should rule Egypt. Now, Mark Antony fled to Egypt, and eventually, after joining his army and navy with hers, being Cleopatra, they were defeated by Octavian. If you listen to my podcast at all, you might remember an episode on Delos. Well, this is where they fled before that major sea battle. Rome was now an empire under Augustus. During his dynasty, Rome was known as Caput Mundi, which translates to capital of the world. Rome was the world. The Julio-Claudian dynasty, which included such emperors as Tiberius, Caligula, and Nero, lasted 95 years until 68 CE, when the Flavian dynasty took over, but only after the year of the four emperors, which saw Galba, Otho, Vitellius, all serve as emperors from the death of Nero. Then Vespasian became emperor, and there is some stability as he ruled for 10 years. He was also the founder of the Flavian dynasty, which would see Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian rule the empire for 27 years total. It was during the reigns of Vespasian and Titus which the Colosseum, more correctly known as the Flavian Amphitheater, was finished. Additionally, this was when the first Jewish revolt occurred. The Flavian dynasty was followed by three emperors not tied to a dynasty, but who, together with the two emperors of the Antonine dynasty, were collectively known as the Five Good Emperors. The first three of these were Nerva, Trajan, and Hadrian. Hadrian, or Hadrian, among other things, spread the empire as far north as the border with Scotland, where a wall was built that is named for him. This is also when the Mausoleum of Hadrian, now known as Castle St. Angelo, was built to house his remains. These three ruled for 42 years between them. The Antonine dynasty ruled from 138 to 192 CE, and here we got the last of the two good emperors, Antonius Pius and the emperor most regarded as one of the best Rome ever had, Marcus Aurelius. He was also the last emperor of the period known as Pax Romana, a period marked by relative peace throughout the empire. He was toward the end co-emperor with Lucius Verus for about 8 years, and then his son governed with him for 3 years from 177 to 180 CE, when Marcus Aurelius died. The cause of his death is unknown, as is the exact location of his death. But his ashes were returned to Rome and resided in the Mausoleum of Hadrian until it was sacked by the Visigoths in 410 CE. Commodus would reign for another 12 years. He is known for his love of the gladiatorial games, and despite what you may have learned from the movie Gladiator, Commodus did not die in the Colosseum during a gladiatorial contest. Instead, he died of strangulation by his wrestling partner, Narcissus, who killed him in his bath after his wife's attempt to poison him had failed. Commodus was not a popular person. Immediately after his death, the empire was thrown into turmoil, with 5 different people claiming the title of emperor. This is why 193 CE is known as the Year of 5 Emperors. This conflict ended eventually with Septimus Severus as the sole emperor in 197 CE, and he ruled until 211 CE. His dynasty, the Severan dynasty, was the last before the imperial crisis in the 3rd century. This crisis was marked with various generals vying for control over the empire. This period ended in 285 CE with Diocletian as the victor. By now, the Roman Empire was expansive, and to help make it more manageable, in 286 CE, Diocletian divided the empire into the Eastern and Western empires, and he gave the Western Empire to Maximian. Civil wars followed because everybody saw the richness of Rome, and eventually ended when Constantine the Great reunified the empire and reinstituted the hereditary succession of emperors. This reunification was mainly in name only, as the East-West divide persisted, and the new capital of the Eastern Empire became Byzantium, which was renamed Constantinople. If you're familiar with the They Might Be Giants song, it eventually became Istanbul. In 408 CE, the capital of the Western Empire was officially transferred to Ravenna, but the emperors maintained Rome as their primary place of residence. In 410, Alaric I sacked Rome with his Visigoth armies. This was the beginning of the end of the Western Empire, and the official end is 476 CE. The Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, lasted to 1453, when it fell and was replaced by the Ottoman Empire. In the Middle Ages, Rome was the site of many small conflicts and sieges, but it was now also part of the Catholic Church. The Pope is known as the Bishop of Rome, and that dates from this time. There was much that happened during this time, but in essence, the Lombard family invaded, making the city part of their realm. Then the Franks invaded. Then an invasion was attempted by the Arabs, which failed. During this time, the power of the Pope grew, as they usually acted as a mediator in the various disputes, which gave them immense power. By 1266, Charles of Anjou became a senator of Rome, and around this time, a papal death led to infighting among the leading families as to who would become pope. These were the families of Annibaldi, Cetani, Colonna, Orsini, and Conti. The populace was so enraged by their inability to choose a pope that they literally imprisoned them in a room until a new pope was chosen. This is how we got the modern concept of conclave. It's kind of weird to think about that, that came about because the people got so pissed off that they couldn't choose a new pope. There's a great deal more papal history that we could go into, but maybe if I do an episode of Avignon, I'll go into a little bit of that. The Renaissance era saw a rejuvenation of Rome as a classical city. The current St. Peter's Basilica, the Sistine Chapel, and the Ponte Sisto were built during this time. Rome was also home to amazing artists such as Michelangelo, Raphael, Botticelli, and Luca Signorelli. This time period also saw the rise of certain families in Italy whose names are familiar to most, including the Medicis and the Borgias. In the late Renaissance, Rome saw these additional families rise, such as the Barbarinis, the Pamphili, the Chigi, and Alteri, who were all protected by the papacy in exchange for major building projects and infusions of cash. A new Roman Republic came about under the French Revolution that lasted from 1798 to 1800, and after that they were part of the administrative area under Napoleon until the Papal States were once again restored in 1814. Another republic sprang up in 1849, and then finally the Kingdom of Italy in 1861. This lasted until 1922, when Benito Mussolini and his fascisti rose to power, and then since the fall of Mussolini in Germany, with whom they were allied during the Second World War, Italy has been a republic with Rome as its capital. What struck me the most when I was there is how the ancient city of Rome and the modern city feel to have fairly seamlessly integrated. One grew up on the ruins of the other, but all throughout the city, you find ancient things and always next to modern. This trait makes it feel as if time came to town, took a soup ladle, and jumbled everything together in one giant mixing bowl. Yesterday is today, and tomorrow all in one. Or, as Doctor Who might put it, wibbly wobbly timey wimey. One of the first things that you notice about Rome is that it is a city for walking. In many areas of the older parts of the city, the streets are narrow and not really conducive to cars, which of course doesn't prevent cars from going down them. Bicycles are a fairly common conveyance, but the best way to get around is still walking. Of course, there are some things you just must see when visiting Rome. If you like history, this is obviously a city for you, and there are plenty of ancient Roman ruins throughout. And some of the most recognizable ones anywhere in the world are here. These include the Colosseum and the Roman Forum, which is right next to it, both of which are just incredible to behold. The floor of the Colosseum is more thoroughly excavated than when I was last there, and you can now see the cells that are underneath where the animals and gladiators lived. It's an amazing building, and the history just seeps off of every single wall and every single column within the Colosseum. The Pantheon is another of these sites which just shouldn't be missed while you're in Rome. It's an ancient Roman temple that converted to a church, and it's beautiful on the outside. It is the Pantheon of Marcus Aurelius. It's beautiful on the outside, and it's beautiful on the inside. On this trip, we spent a great deal of time walking around the city, and we walked past many squares, some which had previously been areas for chariot races in the Roman times. For those looking for slightly more modern locations, both the Trevi Fountain and the Spanish Steps are well worth a stop. Both, of course, known as locations for many famous films, such as Roman Holiday, Three Coins in a Fountain, and La Dolce Vita. Another big part of Rome is all the little cafes and restaurants throughout the city. There are so many of them in the various squares and piazzas that you could do a whole tour of nothing but them if you were so inclined. We walked to the Castle Sant'Angelo, which was originally the mausoleum for Hadrian, as I mentioned, the famed builder of the wall that separates England from Scotland and the United Kingdom, and was used by the various popes as a fortress when the Vatican was under attack. These days, it is a museum, and it is well worth a visit. We also walked down the Via di Condotti, which is a famous shopping street in Rome. This is where you can find pretty much anything haute couture. While out and about, we passed through the Piazza Colonna, which was originally a Roman square, Piazza Navona, which is famous for its Baroque and Renaissance architecture, and Piazza della Repubblica, which is a square in a neoclassical style, and not really a square at all, but rather a semicircle. Of course, what trip to Rome would be complete without a visit to the city within a city, the Vatican? Regardless of if you are Catholic or not, this is well worth a visit. The awe-inspiring sensations that you get standing in St. Peter's Square looking up at the Basilica are just incredible. And a tour of the Basilica and the Sistine Chapel are well worth it. On this last visit, we had requested and received, because it's just an email to the papal household, tickets for a general audience with His Holiness Pope Leo XIV. This was not something normally on my list of things to do, but when we learned that the tickets are free as long as they're issued, then I figured it was at least worth trying to see if we could get them, especially as my traveling companion was Catholic. General audiences are held on Wednesdays, and their location is a little bit weather dependent. They're either held indoors or outdoors, and in our case, it would be outdoors at St. Peter's Square. To request a ticket, you go to the website of the Papal Prefecture, and there's an online form that you fill in to request the tickets. A few days later, they will reply if the tickets are available, and if they are, you'll be informed when and where in the Vatican to go and pick them up. Fair warning, you will likely stand in line for about 2 hours to get them. This will be the day before the audience. The day of the audience, you show up at Vatican. Again, stand in line to get in. And if you arrive early enough, and I suggest no later than about 8:30, you will get seats, and actually pretty decent seats. The general audience starts at 10 a.m. when the Pope arrives. He goes around the crowd on his little Pope-mobile, where he first interacts with the crowd and offers blessings over some, before heading for the dais. Once there are some prayers, and then there's a benediction after the greetings to all the groups and wedding couples that are present. The audience runs for about 2 hours. Now, at the end of it, the Pope did invite anybody that wanted to attend a Mass at St. Paul's Basilica afterwards. But we had opted to continue our last day out in Rome instead, so we spent most of the rest of that day walking around town. We met up with Emilio again, and just enjoyed our last day in Rome. So this then brings us to the end of this episode, and I do hope that you've enjoyed this chance to learn about Rome, and that I've enticed you to visit. I also hope that you enjoy these companion YouTube videos to our podcast series. You can find a link to that in the description below. And remember, if you want help making your own travel dreams come true, feel free to email me at lynx@globetrottingwithlynx.com. That's globetrottingwithlynx, one word.com. You can also find a link to my Fora profile, as well as a link to the Globetrotting with Lynx booking site, where I can help you book some amazing cruises and travel adventures of your own in the description for this episode. Until next time, please keep having amazing travel adventures and enjoying your own globetrotting. This is Lynx saying travel safe and have fun.